I'm Levine, and we'll be covering Mac versus PC today, focusing on which one's right for you. I mentioned it a little bit before we got started, but we will actually not be covering very detailed technical specs today on specific computers. This presentation really is more of a guide for Mac versus PC and choosing which operating system you should go with. I know that's a little bit jargony, but we'll get it sorted out here shortly. And thanks for attending. Just some brief things to cover before we get started. The first being that we've got Cornerstone's Resource Center now live on our website. This is how you can access all of our Tech Tuesday recordings, how you can register for those, and also how you can interact with all of our other webinars. In order to get to it, all you got to do is go to Resources, Resource Center, and click on that link on our webpage. It'll bring you to this Cornerstone Resource Center. Then under Webinar Series here, this little folder, you'll get access to all of our recorded webinars as well. So if you want to find a Tech Tuesday recording or register for our next session, this is where it'd be. It does not require a password, and it houses a number of customizable and ready-to-print marketing materials you can use as well. It's readily available 24/7 on our website, and feel free to call or email me with any questions you might have regarding this. But without further ado, let's get to the tech. Today we'll be covering some necessary terminology just to go over some of the differences. The differences between the corporate goals and mission statements of the companies, some myths and legends about PC and Mac, and how true they are and how not, as well as some typical demands of a Mac versus a PC user, and then my personal recommendations. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, by the way, feel free to drop them there in the questions section or send a message in the chat. You can also reach out to me after the presentation at the contact information, which will be displayed at the end. I will go ahead and cover all of your questions at the very end of the presentation, just kind of running through everything real quick here before I take questions. So like I said, first we're going to cover some necessary computer jargon. We've got software, which are the programs and operating information used by a computer, as you can see the definition there. I like to think of this more as the thoughts of a computer. So if a computer is like a brain, then the software is all the thoughts you have running through. The hardware would be the physical parts of your computer, being the actual physical system. Going back to our brain analogy, that'd be your physical brain in your head. The operating system, or OS, is mainly what we're going to be covering today, and it's the main difference between a Mac and a PC. It's the software that supports the basic functions of your computer. Then we've got the hardware, or the processor, which is the hardware that really does most of the thinking on your computer. What it does is it processes all the fluctuations in the electricity going through the computer and turns it into coherent instructions. And then we've got the CPU, which is basically just a bunch of processors strapped together. It's the area of the computer that does the most processing and thinking. But that leads me into really what a PC is. Most people think PC is just what you'd call any computer that isn't a Mac. But really, it's just an abbreviation of personal computer. Most commonly, it refers to Microsoft operating system run computers. This includes things like Vista or Windows 89 or those kinds of things. But really, a PC can be any computer. Even a Mac really is considered a PC, technically speaking, because it's just a bunch of hardware that's strung together with an operating system run on it. But normally when people refer to PC, they refer to Microsoft OS run computers. It can use hardware from any company and run a variety of different programming languages or operating systems, however. Some other operating systems that are, I guess, considered common, although really not that common, are Linux, Unix, and Ubuntu. If you haven't heard of these, that's probably okay. Linux and Unix, as well as Ubuntu, are really custom operating systems, and whoever's controlling them really builds them from the ground up. So it's not really user-friendly. But if you know what you're doing, it can be wonderful as far as an operating system goes. But like I said, because most PCs are Microsoft OS run, that leads us more into the Microsoft company overall. Their mission statement is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And it's going to be important to take note of this, because this is one of the key differences between Microsoft business strategy and Mac-Apple's business strategy. Just some brief details on Microsoft. It was founded by Bill Gates and Paul Allen in 1975. This was the very, very, very beginnings, by the way. All they really had was a circuit board and running a very, very basic version of BASIX, which is a programming language. In 1980, they formed a partnership with IBM, which bundled Microsoft's operating system with IBM computers. And this was actually the start of the stereotype of PCs really being strictly for business. IBM overall as a company focuses more on business solutions, and that's where that thought of PCs being mostly work-related came from. The original programming language they developed was Microsoft BASIX, and it was pretty much the only language during the 70s and early 80s. Microsoft also delves into a little bit of game systems like Xbox, and they also were very successful and mostly known for the Office suite. This would include some of the things I've already covered in Tech Tuesday, including Microsoft PowerPoint, Microsoft Excel, and Microsoft Word. The suite also includes WordPerfect, Microsoft Access, and a few other programs that most people don't use, but it made it very, very popular with basically every single office that you'll go into. Their main focus is on the development of software over hardware. They did have several other partnerships other than with IBM. They also have Dell, HP, and Sony as their main partners. And personally, my home computer is an HP. Hewlett-Packards really vary depending on how good they are, but my home computer works well for me. Just to give you a general understanding of how popular Microsoft is over Mac as well, excuse me, as well. When we talk about market share of operating systems, Microsoft operating systems own 91% of all operating systems on the market. That includes work and home. Mac has about 5% of the total market share, with 4% being operating systems such as Linux and Ubuntu, which we've covered before. Then that brings us to Apple and Mac's mission statement, which is just a little bit different. Apple designs Macs, the best personal computers in the world, along with the OS X, iLife, and iWork and professional software. Important note, OS X is now actually Mac OS, as it's commonly referred to. Apple also does iPods and iTunes Online, and reinvented the mobile phone industry with iPhone and the App Store. It's also considering itself defining the future of mobile media and computing devices with the iPad. As you can see, the focus overall is more on devices. You see Mac OS, iLife, and iWork kind of play a role, but mainly they're focused on developing devices that work. It was founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Wozniak actually focused more on the product being the software and hardware side of things, while Jobs focused on primarily the business. They were officially incorporated in 1977 as Apple Computing Inc. or Computer Inc., depending on who you talk to. And the corporate focus is on mainly the whole product. Like I mentioned before, Mac has kind of a slightly different approach than PC or Windows does. Mac doesn't just focus on one side of things, being the hardware or the software. They mainly focus on how they can bring it all together into an overall product. They actually partnered with Microsoft in '97 to bring the Office suite to Mac, which just shows how outside the box they're willing to think and partner in order to get the essential software going. They're also focusing on continually improving and implementing additional features and testing ideas. Although it's worth mentioning, they will never release a product that's quote unquote in testing. All of the products they release have been fully tested, fully tried, and will work across all their devices. Which brings us to some myths about Apple. One being mainly the reason people choose Mac, which is that Apple doesn't sell your personal data. Uh, this isn't as true as you might believe. Apple as a company might not sell your personal data directly to someone, but they do sell the opportunity to do so. Google pays Apple routinely just to remain the default search engine. Just this year, they did the same thing. This is the default search engine on Safari, which is the Internet Explorer that Macs normally come with. What Google does is collects every single thing you search. They also collect data on you personally if you have a Google account. So even if you get a Mac, you're not really avoiding the collection of your personal data. Additionally, what Apple does is they will, part of their service agreement states, they group you into platforms and groups of people called segments who share similar characteristics and use that to deliver more targeted ads to you. Even though you might not see as many ads as you might on a PC, you will see ads that are more targeted specifically to you. Additionally, one of the other myths that I see quite frequently is Macs don't get viruses. This isn't really true at all. Macs are just as susceptible to viruses without antivirus software as PCs are. The main difference is that Macs only have about 5% of the market share of the total operating system, as mentioned before. Because of this, most viruses aren't developed to work with Mac OS. They're developed to work with some form of Windows operating system. This means that a lot of the viruses that a PC will get, a Mac might not even be able to run. So that's really where that myth comes in. And then the final myth that I'm going to cover is that Macs can do far more than a PC. This is kind of false as well. Well, a Mac might be able to just do a lot more right out of a box than a PC, which is pretty much where that myth comes from. You can build a PC that does exactly what a Mac does, which is kind of the main difference. If you're going out and you're buying a Mac, you're not going to be able to upgrade parts of it in order to make it a bit better. You will be able to do that with a PC. You can just pick and swap out parts. Your processor in a Mac is always going to be the same one. If you're getting a bit slow and you want to upgrade, then you have to buy an entirely new Mac. You don't necessarily have to do that with a PC. Additionally, right out of the box, PCs are just as comparable now. Mac tends to have a little bit of a higher quality of graphics, but PC models that do about the same cost a lot less. Just looking at the iMac Pro from 2018, that costs about $5,000. And just comparing the memory, hard drive, graphics card, and processor, a comparable PC model would be the Dell Precision All-in-One. It has a terabyte of additional memory than the Mac, a higher processing speed than the Mac, and just slightly lower graphics. And the difference in cost is phenomenal. To get the Dell All-in-One, you'll only be paying about $1,700 compared to the $5,000 of the iMac. So if you're looking to save some money, PC would win on that side, in my opinion. Then there are the PC myths. One being that PCs are just for business, although we covered that a little bit. PCs are not just for business anymore. PCs make wonderful personal computers as well. If you're interested in using a computer to play games, although I highly doubt that, most of the time you're going to want to run a Windows operating system on your computer, just because it's more compatible with everything new coming out. Additionally, you can do a lot of visual editing now on a PC, although Macs do tend to have the edge in that category. Other than that, you'll get about the same. PCs and Macs generally can accomplish all of the same tasks. Additionally, one of the other common myths that I see is that PCs freeze up too much. This is really just a generalization. It really entirely depends on the operating system you run. The freezing problems are more closely associated with the operating systems Windows ME, or Windows Me, and Windows 98. Newer and more powerful versions of Windows operating systems that have come out tend to not freeze up as much, with the exception of Windows Vista. Currently, the operating systems that I'd recommend from Windows include Windows 10, which tend to be free of crashing problems, and quite possibly Windows 8, which tends to be free of problems as well. However, every system has its limit, and every operating system has its limit, which includes Mac. The way that Macs tend to avoid all these processing problems and slowdowns are that all their software is in-house and coded specifically to work with other Apple devices. But that's covered a little bit more coming up, with PCs being difficult to use. Well, that's kind of true. Most people understand Macs more intuitively as far as navigation, but PCs can be just as intuitive. It really depends on what you learned on. If you learn on a Mac, you tend to favor a Mac operating system. If you learned how to navigate a computer on a PC, you tend to prefer to use a PC. That being said, it's really just a personal choice as far as navigation goes. The other problem that people refer to when they say PCs are difficult to use are that it's difficult to connect multiple devices to a PC compared to a Mac. Because Apple products are all coded and produced to work perfectly together with each other, Macs restrict a lot of their code. It's very difficult to become an editor of Mac software, and you have to go through a lot of certifications. Additionally, it's difficult to change out Mac hardware as well, because they want you to bring it into the Apple Store to get work done. This is the exact opposite of how PCs go. Windows approaches are to have several different programming languages and to make everything open to everyone. Well, not everything specifically, but a lot of different things that you wouldn't find on, say, a Mac. You can go out and get third-party printers. You can make a Dell printer work with an HP laptop running Windows operating system and have maybe a graphics card that was swapped out from the original manufacturer. Whereas with Apple products, you really can't do that. It's buy your Apple product, make it work with the whole host of the rest of your Apple products, and that's all it can do. That's why I personally run PCs, but I can understand the complete want to just have a Mac. This brings us more into what Mac consumers want. Mac consumers typically want a total package deal with no additional starting gear they need to buy. They want connectivity across all the host of their devices, and they want to be able to transition between those easily. They want it to be easy to use with fully tested and complete functions. What this means is they want all their computers to work seamlessly without having to put in any other additional driver software or other sort of install. Compare that to what most PC consumers want. They want things to be fully customizable and capable of being upgraded instead of full replacements. This cuts down on the overall cost of your system as well. They also want to be able to focus on the basic abilities of the technology, meaning they want it to be able to run Office typically, maybe run Internet Explorer, and that's about it. Maybe if they're really detailed, they'll focus on maximizing the extent of the ability of their technology. But additionally, PCs are really a testing bed for new ideas as well. If you install different upgrades to your PC, you can add on different functions, which you really can't do with a Mac. If you're trying to get a PC that's really top of the line, a computer that's really wonderful for everything, a Mac will do. But if you want the very most cutting edge and you want functions that maybe not necessarily are fully ready for release, but the ability to upgrade into them as you go along, a PC is typically what you'll want. That being said, what should you choose to use? If you aren't really the most PC savvy and you just want a computer that'll work, I tend to side with Apple. Apple computers can do everything necessary that you need to use. They work really well with each other and connect across all their devices. Additionally, with Apple, if you have your Apple ID, then you can pretty much install everything that you have on one Mac on another. It just installs straight from the cloud, depending on how much data you have. With a PC, the transition between your computers are going to be a little bit more intensive. You'll have to transfer them probably from an external hard drive, or you'll connect the two computers and transfer all your data from one hard drive to another. You also get to pick and choose all the features you want and none of what you don't. The focus is more on basic features and functions, but you can upgrade it at your own pace. And you can feel free to source from a variety of different companies. You could use, like I said, an HP printer with a Dell computer, and so on and so forth, where you might not necessarily be able to get a functioning printer or other add-on with an Apple that isn't another Apple product. So that's really the main difference. Personally, if you're trying to get a cheap computer that just works, I would go PC. If you're trying to get something that'll tie all of your devices together and connect everything, I'd go Apple. Like I said, Apples tend to be more expensive, PCs tend to be less expensive, and if you kind of have the general idea of how computing works, PC is probably going to be better for you. But if you want a full suite of systems, high-end graphics, and focus more on creativity, you probably want an Apple. I did actually cite a lot of sources for this one because I had to do a lot of research. Like I said, I'm a PC user, so typically I tend to lean on that side of things. I had to do a lot of research about how Apples work, how they correspond with each other, and how it all works together. So if you download this, the web links and the citations are right there at the bottom. I'd highly recommend reading all of the articles and gathering some more thoughts for yourself. Additionally, feel free to contact me with any sort of questions you might have. You feel free to call me at my phone number, 513-487-5390, and give me an email at tlevine@crnstone.com. Don't forget to put Tech Tuesday up in the header of your email, because I do sort out where my emails go based on that subject line. Additionally, feel free to reach out to us. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. That'd be Cornerstone Broker Insurance Services Agency. Here is our general line and our general website link. Just to cover a few of the next things we'll be covering, I kind of like to call April Device Month. Now that we've covered some general things about desktops, we're going to cover laptops versus tablets next on 416, which is how to decide if you're going to get a laptop or a tablet, and what to use for client enrollment. As well as on the last day of the month, on the 30th, we're going to be covering mobile devices, smart versus dumb phones, tips and tricks for navigation, and should you choose an iPhone or an Android or some other sort of smartphone. So feel free to tune into that. Additionally, if you were looking for more of a technical specifications guide, we'll also have a special guest presenter, Jeff Draver. He will be covering some more tech specs, and that'll be on June 25th. So feel free to tune back in. He's with Connective Computing, which is our in-house IT, and he'll be happy to answer any questions you might have about technical specifications. That'll be really useful if you're trying to choose between one PC or another. If you have any questions, feel free to type them up, and I'll be happy to answer with the remainder of my time. Thank you. It looks like we do have a few questions here. Richard asks, here we go. Let me try and expand this a little bit. For some reason, it's all as one question. Can you compare the quality between Macs and PCs in terms of hardware, but also in terms of crashes? Macs often do not crash as much as Windows. That is not necessarily true, as I covered. It really depends on what PC you get. With the top-of-the-line Mac, you're probably not going to have as many crashes as, say, an older PC. But really it depends on the driver software you install, and as well as if your computer is fully up to date with its hardware. Crashing is, like I said, really a function of how old the operating system is, if it's been fully updated. But really you're not going to see as much of a difference as long as you're using an up-to-date computer with all the driver software installed. And can you compare the file system between PCs and Macs? And can you compare finding a file on Mac versus a PC? Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and exit the presentation to go ahead and do this. But if you have a File Explorer up, I'm going to go ahead and start up a File Explorer now with PC. All I did, and I'm actually doing a clean show right now, so let me clean that up. If I go into the full screen of monitor 1. This is a PC background, and I unfortunately do not have access to a Mac to show you the main difference right now, but down in the bottom corner here, you'll see a Windows logo on a PC, and if you just search anything in here, it'll search the entire desktop. Another thing you can do is this little icon down here is the File Explorer. Typically on a PC, your files will generally at the start be either pinned to the bottom like this, or there will be an icon right here that has a folder. If you open up the File Explorer, you've got quick links over here. These icons here are the different drives and removable disks I have on the PC. That would include the home drive, which is my normal hard drive on this computer, the K drive, which is a drive that we all share in Cornerstone, and things like that. You also have access to your libraries on a PC, which include documents, music, pictures, and videos, although it's really just areas to save things. You can navigate through them with the bar over here. I like to normally start navigating from this computer dropdown and then choose the drive I use. Typically, you're going to want to choose either the J or K drive, depending on your computer. That's just typically what they're named. Also, if you plug in a USB like I do, it'll be removable disk up in this section for removable storage, as well as hard disk drives for your operating system. You can also go to desktop, and then from there choose any of the folders or programs that are available there. With a Mac, I understand the navigation is fairly similar nowadays, but I'm not really normally used to using Macs. I believe they've adopted a similar file system. And then we did have a few other questions as well. If I scroll through here, Google Chrome OS. That's a very good question, Richard. The Google Chrome OS is really not, it's more useful for smaller devices such as the Chromebook. The main difference between the Windows OS and the Chrome OS is really just programming. It's more designed to use very basic functions, things like Google Chrome specifically as a navigator, as well as really useful for using minor programs, things like the Google version of Excel, which is Google Sheets. And really it's just specified to more use Google systems versus Microsoft systems. I believe the overall goal of those systems is to bring a lot of the Google functions in-house. They're tending to kind of copy Apple nowadays with bringing all of their devices under one roof. So they're kind of going to that route as well. And they also tend to be cheaper than Macs. So maybe in the future when they've got a little bit more support for them, might be a good idea. Very good question, Richard. If there are no other questions, I'm going to go ahead and end the session. But if you have anything else, feel free to ask.